Caddis Maximus here. This time it's kind of a real quick basic review and comparison of the 3/8 inch drive SK impact swivel sockets to the Craftsman 3/8 inch drive universal swivel sockets non-impact. I've already done reviews of both these exact sets in 1/4 inch, surprisingly enough, both the SK and the Craftsman. I wasn't able to dig out my 3/8 inch at the time, but I decided to bring them out now in a bit of a redundant review because I've already reviewed the smaller sizes, but it'll allow me to touch on a couple points that I wasn't able to in the reviews of the earlier 1/4 inch drive reviews of these tools, as well as having a nice thumbnail image with a big array of sockets and, of course, generally showing them off, which, of course, is always fun. One thing I'll mention about this Craftsman sets is I don't believe they have every socket made in these 1/4 inch or these universal sockets, because I bought 7-piece base sets and then off the shelf pieced together as many individuals as I could. Hence the Imperial on the 3/8. I only have the original 7-piece set. They never stocked any other sizes, and I never got around to ordering it. I've always been someone who likes to purchase tools sight seen rather than sight unseen, because even nice tools, you don't want to end up with that one that's on the shelf that has the weird little defect or something. It always kind of eats at you and you're like, oh, I got that one and it has the weird little defect. Another thing I'll point out is the SK impact swivel sockets are vastly more expensive than the Craftsman's, probably 3 to 4 times as much money as far as flat retail prices. You could probably get both these Craftsman sets. I've upgraded the 3/8 to a 10-piece set in metric. And still probably retail it's about $150 or less for all these Craftsman sockets. It could easily set you back $500 for all these SKs today. I got these. These were off of eBay, and these were from a auto parts store that was shutting down, and were a screaming deal, like $100. So the SKs tend to sell as full, complete master set. So this 3/8 is from 8mm to 22mm, 15 pieces, no skips. The metric 1/4 inch is 12 pieces, 5 through 15mm, no skips. And then they only have a 6-piece set of the Imperial. I do not have the Imperials in the SK. But that's one thing that you're paying for, is you're just getting every single size, not skipping sizes. The one thing I was going to point out about the SKs is we get some similar size ones here. I believe we got 13mm. If I can dig that up. It's just to show generally the size difference. The 1/4 inch will obviously get in the much tighter spaces. They're both shorter and have a narrower drive end, or I can't remember what this part is called. And except for they're a lot weaker. And I would recommend 3/8. And if you're going to get a set, probably get the 3/8 over the 1/4 inch. 1/4 is just going to be cheaper, but you're much more likely to break it, and it's a lot less versatile. A 3/8 set will do a lot more stuff, and that's really the crux of it. Is you get the 1/4 inch to add to sets and the set build, but as far as doing work, you really need the 3/8 first. The other thing I wanted to point out about these SKs here is the fact that even though the newer ones are laser etched, these were made about 15 years after these. I got these around the year 2000. These I just got a few years ago, and they're still basically made the exact same way. Same font, same kind of machine work in the socket ends. Got a flashlight to see down in there. Come on, there we go. Why does it have such a hard time seeing inside there? There we go, pretty much the same way. You can see on this 3/8 the drill bit was pretty darn dull, unless some heavy gouging in there. Otherwise, the last thing to say really about the SK sockets is that they're really well sized. They're really tightly sized compared to the Craftsman's. And then on a last note, we'll just compare the SKs for people who want to. This is a Harbor Freight, so I ended up getting the Harbor Freight new generation impact swivels, and they're really not that bad. They're about the same size as the SKs. And versus using this metal collar, and I've seen some of these where this metal collar has cracked. And I guess it's hit or miss whether that's really the best design or using this hardened steel spring to retain the cross pin is. But they're generally about the same. Surprisingly enough, the Harbor Freights are a little bit more compact. I just don't believe they'll be quite as durable. And one last aspect I forgot to mention about the SKs is they are really tight tolerances on the walls. I wouldn't say that they're too thin, but they are high access, and the SK really balances that of having as narrow a wall as possible to make them more versatile in tighter spaces without compromising the solidity of the socket. When you use a little bit cheaper metals like this Harbor Freight, you compensate through extra wall thickness. And then here's a Gray's Pneumatic, which is a common high quality brand. And you can see the Gray's is made just about the same way as the SK, even though this is a deep well. Just about the same size. On to the Craftsmans that I forgot to mention. In the 1/4 inch, you do have some issues. With these Craftsmans, I'll have to say that when you do use them and you've torqued them pretty hard, it tends to loosen up whatever causes them to bind. And so, like on this 14 millimeter, if I can get it to focus, I mean, it's just basically totally gone. The resistance is totally gone. So that makes it frustrating because you either have to use a vise or something to try to press this together or swage out the little pin to try to get them to get a little bit of spring tension, but when they flop around, they're much more difficult to use. So that was one thing I did want to mention about the Craftsman. Another thing I wasn't able to do was compare quality of the Craftsman to at least a 1/4 inch drive to various other ones. I think I did on those GM Power Torque reviews I did, but here's a SK 1/4 inch chrome versus a Craftsman. The one thing I will still mention is, like on this nice SK, they still use straight walls there, so when you get this wound up, it can lock up like that. And on the Craftsmans, they have tapered walls so they can't bind up. They won't lock up. They'll get a lot of resistance, but they won't actually lock up. And I didn't want to point that out. On these 3/8 ones, they're exactly the same as the 1/4 inch. They use the corrugations on the top of the socket to make it easier to identify that it's a metric socket. And because they're just thicker and heavier duty, they tend to work out a bit better. And excuse me. One thing also that I'll note about Craftsman, and I just noticed this right now, is in the 1/4 inch, they don't do the knurling on the metric, and then they have a consistency issue here, is where the darker gold colored, and the Craftsman does that gold colored in metric and just shiny silver. In Imperial, or what I used to think, but these are both metric sockets, and this is gold in 3/8 but silver in Imperial, and the Imperial is actually gold on the 1/4 inch. So that's a little bit frustrating, because when you get used to the tools, you'll think, okay, I need to grab a metric, a gold socket. Well, if you grab a gold 1/4 inch, you're getting an Imperial socket. And they don't do the knurling on the metric ones, or either size. So that's one thing to point out. And then we'll just do the last comparison that I did with these. I did a review of these 12-point GM Power Torques, and we have one Snap-on 12. And we have the Craftsman, and that was one nice aspect of the Craftsman I wanted to point out, is it was the shortest of the bunch, and so it does work well. Although the drive ends of the Craftsman sockets are not as tight as the SK, they do fit with a bit more play. The 3/8 still have that tapered design that doesn't lock up, and so the Craftsman sockets are really nice, but I wouldn't consider them to be absolutely perfect. One other thing I was going to mention about that taper is it does significantly reduce the amount of flexibility that the socket has. And so if we compare the Craftsman against a Impact Universal SK, it has a bit more flex, maybe 45 degrees versus this 30 degrees, but it's not a fantastic amount. And so you also have to consider impacts may be better in a lot of situations, not just because of their strength, but because they truly don't bind up. They have what's known as a constant velocity joint, where even the Craftsmans with their little tapers, you know, they're clunky and clicky and that kind of thing. And ultimately, they're not going to be quite as strong, because this little pin here, where it's on both drive ends, is where all the load's going through. And on an impact socket, you can see the size of that slot. It's much larger than this pin. So the impact socket has a heavier duty drive parts, thicker drive parts, and that's another thing to consider. Anyway, that was enough of my rambling video about universal and swivel sockets. I really appreciate everybody so much for watching and subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Catus Maximus out.